Hello and welcome to this video. Today I want to talk about the basic conditions and how you can make conditions in C# with if, else and else if. I don't want to talk about conditional operators just yet, because I want to cover this topic in the next video. Okay, so in C# and the most other programming languages, you can decide to only run a code block if a condition that is tested before is met. To do that, we use if statements. So let's create an if statement to check if our dog's name is Berno. To do that, write if, followed by an opening round bracket, followed by our condition, followed by a closing round bracket, followed by the code block that should only be executed if this condition is met. You already learned in the variables video about bools, which are conditions, and they can either be true or false. And that's the same for the normal conditions that you write here that are not saved inside the variable. They also can only be true or false. You can see two equal signs here in our condition. These two equal signs are the comparison operator. You can see that on the left side of the equal signs we have doginstance.getName, which is the name of our dog, and on the right side we have the string Berno. And the two equal signs are checking if these two strings are exactly equal, so are exactly the same. And only if this condition is true, so only if the two strings, the one on the left side of the operator and the one on the right side of the operator, are exactly equal, then the code block is executed. For the case that you only want to write one line of code inside your if statement's code block, you can remove the opening and closing curly bracket. You don't need them if you only want to write one statement inside there, but if you write more than one statement, you need the opening and closing curly bracket to define the code block that shall only be executed if the condition above is true. Let's log the dog's name is Berno inside our if statement's code block. And also, I want to change the age attribute that we created last time with a get and set accessor. And if you remember correctly, we can change the age attribute just by writing an equals, like we do with the normal variable, even though it uses setter and getter methods in the background. Like I told you, you can just access it like a normal variable if you use the get and set accessors of C#. Okay, let's imagine our dog Berno is 10 years old. So if we know that the dog's name is Berno, then we also know that the dog is 10 years old, so we will set the age attribute to 10. And then we continue with an else statement. An else statement is only executed in case the condition of the if statement above is not met. Only if the if statement above is not executed, then the else statement below will be executed. That's how else statements are working. Okay, let's write a debug log inside the else statement that says that we don't know how old the dog is if it's not Berno, so we also set the dog instance age to 0. And after that, let's log the age so we can see which statement was actually executed. And remember, the last debug log statement is outside the code block of the else condition and outside the code block of the if condition. So it has nothing to do with those two conditions, so it will be executed anyways, completely independent from the if and the else statement. Okay, and to demonstrate you, let's try this out. Remember, we have set our dog's name to Berno this time. That means we are expecting our if statement to trigger and not our else statement. And if we start, we can see that the age 10 will be printed. That means our if statement triggered and the else statement did not trigger. After this, let's change our dog's name to Bernaldo and try it again. And this time you can see that our if statement don't triggers because the condition is false, but our else statement triggers exactly because of this, because the if statement did not trigger. That's the reason why the else statement triggers, and that's why our dog's age is 0 at this time. Okay, now it's time to show you the third topic of this video, and that's else if. To do that, let's add another else to change the upper else to an else if statement. And what is an else if statement doing? That's actually pretty easy. An else if statement is exactly like an else statement, only checked if the if statement above was false. But the difference between an else if statement and an else statement is that the else if statement has a condition itself as well. That means the else if statement will be checked after the if statement was not triggered, then the else if statement will be checked, and then if the condition of the else if statement is met, the else if code block will be executed, and if not, then the else if code block will not be executed, and if there is a else, then the else code block will be executed. If there is no else, then nothing will happen. And now that I mentioned else if statements, there's another thing that I need to explain, and that is how many else if statements you can put after an if statement. And the answer to this is pretty simple: as many as you wish. You just need to understand how the else if statements and also the if statements are triggered. And that is pretty simple. Because the thing is, if one else if statement is true and will be executed, the other else if statements will be ignored. The else if statements will be checked in the order in which you wrote them. So first, the first else if statement that you wrote will be checked, and if you have two more, then the second one and then the third one will be checked. But the second and the third one will only be checked if the first one was not met. As soon as one of the else if statements is met, then all the other statements will be ignored. And that's the same for the if statement. If the if statement was met, then the else if statements will not be checked. Okay, and one more sentence about the condition that I wrote here. As you can see, for the condition of the else if statement, I didn't use the conditional operator equals equals again. No, this time I used the conditional operator exclamation mark equals. And this is different than the equals equals because this one is exactly the opposite. It is checking if something is not equals to the other thing. So this time it's checking if the age of our dog is not equals to 0. So it can be anything else than 0. And if we now go ahead and run this code, you can see that 0 gets printed to the console. That means that the else if statement was triggered. The else if statement was the else statement before, and if you remember correctly, we have set age to 0 in this statement. That means that the else if statement was triggered this time. If I now set the age to 0, you can see that if we start the script again, the else statement will be triggered. That's because our dog's name is not Berno and our dog's age is 0, but the else if statement checks that it is not 0. That means the else if statement is not correct because it is exactly 0, and that's why the else statement gets triggered. And now for the last example that I want to show you, I have changed the script a bit. If you check this out, you can see that I have set age to 5. Then I have two if statements. The first one is checking if age is equals to 5. If that's the case, it is debug logging the dog's name is Berno. And the second if statement is checking if the name of the dog is Bernardo. If that's the case, the debug log will say the dog's name is Bernardo. And these two statements are actually completely independent from each other. That's what I want to show you here. If you write these two if statements like this, they are completely independent from each other. They will both get executed and they have nothing to do with each other. I know the example with the debug logs, it doesn't make much sense, but it's just an example. I just want to show you that these two if statements are completely independent from each other if you write it like this. If you want them to be dependent on each other, however, you can do that by writing the second if statement inside the code block of the first if statement, because then the second if statement will only be checked if the first if statement is true. But if you write it like this, they have nothing to do with each other, and they can both be true and both be executed. And if we execute this, you can see exactly that. Both if statements have been executed. First it prints the dog's name is Berno, then it printed the dog's name is Bernardo. That means the if statements were both executed. And that means both if statements were completely separate from each other and have nothing to do with each other. And that's what I wanted to show to you. That's it for this video. I hope you understood everything and I see you next time. Welcome to the end of this video. Hit the subscribe button to stay updated. Also, if you need some high quality assets for your game or like our channel and want to support us, feel free to check out our assets at the Unity or Unreal Asset Store. You'll find the link to our store pages in the description. I hope you learned something new and see you next time.